Well, I am John Ryan McGreevy. I am a second-year icon student, also part of the anthropology department, and I am first, so hopefully I can strategically communicate and get across some good ideas to y'all. For those that were here last year, some of this is going to be a little bit of a repeat. It's some of my previous data that I'm looking at in a different way based on actually some of the coursework that I've had to take for this integrative conservation program that's allowing me to think about things in a different way. The title is Economic Trade-Offs, Adaptive Capacity, and Tree Use, bringing together different concepts in this ICON program of how do we look at the social and the environmental and the ecological and bring it all together. This is a picture right on the coast of my study site in rural Haiti, and this house was destroyed by a hurricane, and that will come into play as we go. So these numbers here look a little crazy. They're all over the map, but this is Hurricane Jeanne that swept through in 2004, and these are actually total lives lost in these different countries. And you look at these different countries and you're like, okay, 5 in the United States, 0 here in Cuba, 18 in Dominican Republic, 8 there, and then 3,008 in Haiti. And you wonder why, even though it was a tropical storm when it was at that point, it actually hit a Class 3 hurricane when it hit the United States. What is going on there? So any guesses as to why that number is so high? Ideas? Poor infrastructure could be part of it, yeah. And in general, just more vulnerability. What we're going to talk about today is low adaptive capacity, or the ability to change in a desirable way when something impacts your life. And also, I'm a little biased, but my research is on tree loss, and I believe a lot of it had to do with that because 3,000 of these lives were lost in one village in the Northwest that is right next to where I did my research. And what happened there was that because there were no trees on the hillside, landslides came down and wiped out a whole village, killing 3,000 people. So this, I'm just going to go through some definitions and how I'm going to talk about them today. A lot of these terms are very contested, but vulnerability deals with how much you're in harm's way and also your ability to adapt to what's going to happen. And then there's trade-offs that we're going to look at, ecological versus economic, and you can either be able to just cope, where you need to make a decision that might hurt you in the long run, but in the short term, you get that economic benefit that you need, or you might be able to adapt, where you can also have long-term ecological services and economic stability. And then there's something called adaptive capacity, or the ability to adapt, and they're specific, which is a warning system that will tell you when a hurricane is coming, is specific to that one particular disaster that you might be vulnerable to. Or there's more generic, such as you have economic capital. If something happens, then you can buy a new home. There's different ways to adapt to that. And then climate change outcomes. Whenever I say climate change, I'm going to be referring to, in this talk, unpredictable rainfall, changing growing season, and extreme weather events. Because the people that I worked with never actually said the words climate change, but these are the things that they referred to, and in the literature, these are things that different scientists have said might be the products of climate change. My question being, how do vulnerability and low adaptive capacity influence economic decision-making in the form of tree cutting? So Haiti has gone from 80% tree cover to, it's contested now. Some people say 2%, some people say 20% tree cover, and that has an impact on the vulnerability of the populations there. And that's what I'm studying. This work was from 2012 and 2013, a while ago, but I'm looking at it through a new lens since being in some courses here. There are a lot of interviews, observations, focus groups in anthropology, and this is just giving you an idea of what the study sites looked like. Very dry, very arid, and so when rain events do occur, it causes a lot of havoc in terms of erosion. The results here, this is the part that's the most in progress that I'm working on. I'm working on quantifying this. One of my professors said that I should do that, but basically listed in order the results when I ask them, why do you cut trees? It's a very basic question, and it gets down to that decision making that's going on. And more often than all of the other ones was they had crop loss due to climate variability. So that's what I really focused on. What I'm dealing with right now is what other things do I throw in there with climate variability, with climate change? Because some of these, like insects, that could also be impacted by changes in climate, changes in the growing patterns. They have this specific type of grub that comes now because the rain comes a few months later during the year, and so their shallots get eaten by grub. So there's a lot of stuff that's actually interconnected in this. These things down here were things in the literature that people said, okay, this is why people cut trees in Haiti, but these were not actually mentioned by anyone during the research that I was doing. And also in observations, it was the opposite of this lack of valuation. They actually did highly value these trees. And these are some of the valuations that they had, the services and different products that they produced. So when they're making these economic decisions, it's not, what I'm arguing is that it's not a lack of valuation of these long-term ecosystem services. What it actually is you're weighing out the long-term services that are possible from these trees standing there, and then your benefit that you're going to need at that point in time. If you cut down a tree, you can then get money for that, and you can pay for your house that was destroyed. You can pay for your child that died in a storm, that sort of thing. So really quick, going to jump through some pictures about the discussion and go through a quick conclusion here. These are all my pictures from my study sites, but here you see crops that were destroyed because it did not rain for the whole year in this particular area, according to the local people, which is not the case normally. They're in a very bad drought. So we're looking at low adaptive capacity because he had no other way. He had no trees on his property that he could cut. There was not much that he could do in that term, so he went up to the mountains and cut some other trees. These are mango trees that typically provide food for any orphan children or anyone that's walking around. So what you're doing, what I'm arguing, is that they make a decision in which they choose that at this point in time, I know the valuation of these trees, but I need to cut them down and I need to have a liquid economic capital. And so they cut down a mango tree that might have long-term other services, and then in doing so, they changed that from a standing generic capacity, so something that would allow them to adapt in a positive way in the future. When another thing occurs, another extreme weather event, and something that is a potential economic capital, and also an ecological capital in the form of ecosystem services. And they changed that to a strictly liquidated economic capital that is either charcoal or wood, and then they sell that, and this is a charcoal exchange going on right there. And then it is removed from the household system, and what occurs is a lowering of that adaptive capacity, and in the future they are more vulnerable and less likely to adapt in a positive way, not from a lack of valuation, but actually from necessity and a decision making that goes on where they decide that that's what they need to do at that point in time. So this is the area that you can see it's very, very heavily deforested except for right around the village there. And what happens is when those big storms come in, that place where 3,000 people died was right around there. And all of this water flushes down into that region. So this is just basically everything I said. Low adaptive capacity, high vulnerability leads to cutting trees, making products, changing that stored ecological capital, economic capital, and generic capacity to just economic capital that's transferred out of the household system, increasing vulnerability and decreasing the adaptive capacity to climate change. So that is my talk. Talked a little fast, but thank you. Yeah, sure. And Haiti is very beautiful. I know a lot of these presentations, everybody's like, oh, Haiti, you know, I tell you all the bad stuff, but there's some really beautiful places as well. So, questions? Yes?
It seems like these are kind of national level issues that are going on. What is it about this particular site that caused the landslide there?
Very good question. They are national level issues, and most of the studies have been done at a national level, but what I noticed when I went up to this area was that the responses that they gave to my questions were completely different than those that were being given in other areas in terms of why they were cutting down trees. And so why I chose this site was because it's more arid, and it's a place that's not studied very often. It's not very nice to stay in. There's no hotels, that sort of thing. So a lot of this research that has been done has been right around Port-au-Prince, where the government and the NGOs have the most value of the area, and so they're kind of saturated in their research there. I expounded out to an area that was more arid, had a little bit of different ecology to it, but also was more vulnerable to these storms as well. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah.
I just wanted to comment that I think it's really interesting that what you read in papers is not what you found, because it seems like the things that you read in papers are the things that I read kind of from this ecological perspective, and then you came in with a more kind of ethnographical attitude, and you found this really different thing that shows this very different and kind of tragic picture of what's happening, where it's like people are making things worse out of this desperation and poverty, right? It's not like they don't care, it's that they don't have another choice, and I think that really changes kind of the attitude of what can you do in this situation to make it better, right? So I think it's just a really great example of how looking at things through different disciplines is really valuable.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And yeah, most of the reforestation projects are based on those things that were said in the literature. So a big thing that I want to do and have done a little bit in my strategic communications component is bring that back to these NGOs that are doing projects and tell them, hey, look, maybe investing completely in telling these people how trees are really important and your time and money there is not doing much because they already know that. And it's a little insulting to them because they're like, look, that's not what's actually going on. But yeah, and definitely one thing that I didn't talk about was land tenure. People, all the literature says it's all about land tenure, it's all about that, it's all about that. That was never mentioned. And when I brought it up, because I was like, hey, look, I've read this, they were like, it's all about water tenure, it's all about water. And so it's different depending on the areas. So I'm gonna do my PhD work on looking at different sites and how different ecological, social components lead to a heterogeneity across the whole country. That means you can't do one project throughout the whole country, it has to be different. So. Yeah, do we have time? Yeah, okay, cool, yeah.
Have you looked at other options for them to benefit economically besides the trees?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people have been working on that, and Haiti is known as the Republic of NGOs right now. There's more NGOs per capita in Haiti than any place in the history of the world. NGOs being non-governmental organizations. And they all have, or not all of them, a lot of them have this idea of how do we give them alternative economic incentives, that sort of thing. So a lot has been done. A lot has been done in some bad ways. A lot has been done in some good ways. What they're trying to do, one thing is there's a lot of mangoes in that area. They're trying to get them to export mangoes. There's no infrastructure set up for that. And then, for example, when you get to Whole Foods, you want to buy a mango that's perfect looking, but if it had to travel the bouncy roads to Haiti all the way down. So there's a lot of things that go into that. There are alternative economic things that people are employing. There's also alternative, the charcoal is used for fuel, and so there's more sustainable fuels that people are bringing and that sort of thing, but all of which needs to be done, I believe, in a way in which you sit down and talk to the people first, which has not always been done in this capacity. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, guys.